Thank you for joining us and welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about web soil survey and just soil at your fingertips. My name is Miranda Wagner and I'm a district technician with the Sherburne Soil and Water Conservation District. And joining us tonight also is David Wick, who is also a district technician with the Sherburne Soil and Water Conservation District. So tonight we will do about a half an hour presentation and then we will have 30 minutes or so set aside for any questions that you may have, but please utilize the chat during the presentation as well if you have any questions. And if they're pretty simple, we can answer them right away. Otherwise, we will wait until the question and answer period. So knowing your soils. So I'm guessing most of you attending tonight live in Sherburne County. And it is well known that Sherburne County is very, very sandy. And it is very important for us to know what our soil type is, because what our soil type tells us is what some of our limitations for our soil might be. So if you look over at the graphic, it has the different particle sizes of, thank you, of different types of soil. So as you can see, the sand particle is far larger than the silt and the clay. And a lot of our soils in Sherburne County are sandy, which means that there is a lot of pore space or open space in the soil between those soil particles, which means that it's very easy for water to infiltrate out of our soils, which is one of the reasons that it makes it very dry. And then also because of the makeup of our soils, the parent material of our soils, they're also very low in organic matter, which is another reason that we have a hard time holding on to water, but also nutrients. So when we're looking at our soils, again, we need to know our soil type, our limitations of that soil type, and also the amount of nutrients that we have in our soil. If we're planning on growing anything, it could be turf grass, or it could be your garden, or it could be a crop field. We need to know what we're starting with so that we have a plan for where we can go with it. So there are different things that we have in our toolbox for that. The first that I'm going to very briefly talk about is a soil test. Soil tests should be done every 3 to 4 years. And then the bulk of our presentation will be about Web Soil Survey, which is an online free tool that all of us have available that we can look up at our property and bring up soils maps. And there's a bunch of different tools that we can use with that. And then lastly, ag professionals, soil and water conservation districts, city and county staff, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or the NRCS for short, and the University of Minnesota Extension are also all very good people or websites that you can visit to learn more about your soils. So the first thing we're going to talk about is a soil test very briefly. So what can a soil test tell you? Why are they important? They let you know where your current nutrient levels are. And in very sandy soils, we're usually not going to be getting a result for nitrogen because nitrogen is so water soluble that it leaves our soils very quickly. But we will be looking at levels of phosphorus and levels of potassium, as well as getting a good benchmark of what our organic matter is in our soil, as well as our pH. Soils in Sherburne County can be very acidic, so it might be advantageous for you to figure out what your pH is in case you need to do a soil amendment in the fall, like liming. So there are different do's and don'ts of soil sampling. You want to sample every 3 years, which I already alluded to, but it's important because our nutrient levels are constantly changing, especially if you're adding amendments. There's kind of that, well, more is always going to be better, but that's not true. If you're putting down more phosphorus than what your soil can use, for example, phosphorus bonds with soil particles, and if it leaves your property, either by wind or water, you're carrying that phosphorus with you, and it can get into our waterways and cause things like algae blooms. Um, the other reason is so that you can track your pH to make sure that you don't need to do some sort of amendment. When you're doing a soil sample, it's important to do a composite sample, which means that you aren't just taking one soil sample from one spot and putting in a bag. You're going to look at your property and you're going to look at all of the areas that are the same. You want a soil sample that's representative of each kind of zone or area of your property. And take, different samples, mix them together in a bucket, a plastic bucket, put them in a soil bag and send it in. And you want to do a depth of 6 inches. This is important to make sure that you are seeing what's really available to your plants. Most of what our plants use is in the top 6 inches. Things that you want to remember that you don't want to do is include vegetation or manure. This can majorly throw off your organic matter readings that you get back, but also your nutrients. And you do not want to sample under wet conditions either. You do not want to be sending in wet soil samples. And then this is a YouTube video that we can send out. Extension it's a 10-minute long video that goes over in detail how to do a soil sample. It's important that you do a random sample and that you are doing the 6 inches. So this is it's specifically for horse pastures. However, this can work for a yard. It can work for a garden. It's really just an in-depth overview of how to take a soil sample. So they are specifically going to talk about sending these samples to the U of M in St. Paul, but there are also local vendors that can help you with soil samples, including like nutrient egg solutions in Big Lake. There's also Centro Soda in Santiago. Those are both local places that can actually even come out and do soil sampling for you if you would like that. And so now we're going to get into web soil survey, and we will send out this website, so that you have this available to you. But in case you wanted to follow along, you can just Google web soil survey and it will bring you to this first page. Again, this is a free website and it's put out by the USDA, or the United States Department of Ag. So the very first thing you're going to do is press on that green Start WSS button. And it will bring you to this next page. The first thing that you need to do to utilize web soil survey is to put in your address so that we can help define an area of interest. You don't even need to put in your full address. You can just put in your street address, you can hit view, and it will give you options in case there's more than one, we'll say Jackson Avenue in the United States. So you can type in your address and you can hit view. And what it will do, if you go to the next screen, is bring you to your property. And this is a random property in Sherburne County. And at the top, it will say define area of interest. And I chose rectangle, but you can also choose polygon. If you see, there's a rectangle option and there's a drawing a polygon. So if you have an irregular area that you would like to choose as your area of interest, you would simply draw it instead of dragging a rectangle. But in our case, we have a square property that we were looking at. And so once you define your area of interest, you'll hit view, and then it will pull up your soil map. This is an easy property. It's all the same soil map unit. It is all a Zimmerman fine sand, which is a huge makeup of what is happening in Sherburne County. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to get this warning. And David can cover this a little bit more. You're going to want to use Google Chrome as your browser. It is the easiest to use, and what everything is going to show up better in Google Chrome. But you are going to get this warning at the bottom of your page, and you don't need to worry about it. What this is basically telling you is that your accuracy is not going to be very, very good. And part of the reason that is because when they did soil mapping, that in itself is a very close estimate of where different soil lines and different soil map units are changing. So to say that this is 100% what your soil map unit is, we just can't do it to that scale. And we especially can't do it to that scale using aerial imagery and drawing lines within a web browser. So you can disregard this, but just remember that this is not an official soil survey that you could take if you needed it for like a court case or something like that. You would need to have it professionally done by a soil scientist, but very much close enough for what you will be using it for. So I'm going to go over 2 helpful tools that I like to use, and then I'm going to pass it over to David. So if you look at the top, after you get your area of interest delineated, then you're going to have all of these options at the top, including suitabilities and limitations for use, soil properties and qualities, and also ecological sites. So first, we're going to look at land classification, which is under suitabilities and limitations for use. And I'm going to briefly talk about ecological site IDs and your hydric ratings, because this is what I mostly work with when I'm working with a landowner.
So if I will go on and I will talk about some erosion hazard and wind throw hazard and just give you a little bit more of a tutorial on things that are more landscape versus agriculturally based.
Perfect. So there are 2 options under land classification. So your ecological site ID, and then if you go down a little bit further, the hydric rating. The reason that I want to talk about these is if you have a pasture situation, if you're trying to grow grass for a grazing animal, it is important to know what your ecological site ID is, because it helps you figure out what your growing capacity is for your land. You may not be able to do all of that by yourself unless you are very savvy with government-based websites, but it is something that I could help you do, or NRCS could help you do. And then I also want to go over your hydric ratings. This gives you a good idea if you're about to try and build a shed in a wetland, which is not prohibited by the Wetland Conservation Act or by the county. So if you go to the next slide, these are things that if you know your ecological site ID, in a different website, we can pull up things like your available water capacity. And as you can see, a Zimmerman fine sand is rated very low for its ability to hold water and have water available for forage production. Also, it gives you a good idea of your fertility. So it's basically going to say that you're going to have a hard time holding on to nitrogen, and that you need to figure out what you have for phosphorus and potassium. And that it's also, if you read at the very bottom, it's very important to apply nitrogen in a split application, because it's going to be very mobile in your soil. And then the next slide is going to show you what, it's kind of it's a good snapshot of what your expectations should be for your forage. So this can be found under the Field Office Tech Guide that the Natural Resources Conservation Service has. And this is something that I can help you get if you were interested in this for your property or your soil type. So this gives again, an estimate of the type of, or the amount of forage that you can get based on the type of management that you're doing. So when you have high versus medium versus low management, that's looking at how are you managing your lands? Are you doing integrated pest management? Are you selecting good species? Are you grazing appropriately, which means usually not season-long grazing? And as you can see, the higher level of management that you have, the more tonnage or the more animal units you can feed off of that property. But it does give you a nice estimate, a nice goal in the back of your mind, um, for your different types of management on the soil types that you have. And then the second thing I wanted to show you is hydric rating. And so this, if you go to hydric rating and you hit view rating, green is non-hydric. Of course, it's always important if you're going to be doing any sort of work on your property to check with planning and zoning first. But on a Zimmerman fine sand, it's usually unlikely that you will find any sort of inclusion of a wetland in this very non-hydric soil type. But if we go to the next slide, this is just another random property that I actually pulled from Hennepin County. And you can see that you have a much larger scale of your non-hydric, your predominantly non-hydric, your sometimes hydric, and then your hydric soils. So if you were planning a project or a garden, we'll say putting up a barn, a shed on this property, you would want to make sure that you were not impacting a wetland or doing any sort of fill. And you also don't want to put a garden in a wetland. You're not going to be able to manage those soils very well. So on this L50A, which is a Hennepin soil map unit, that is most likely going to be an indicator that you have a wetland on your property, and you need to make sure that you're not impacting that, so that you're in good graces with the state law and the county laws. And then I'm going to pass it on to David.
All right, guys. So Miranda's kind of gone through some tools that focus more on the agricultural side of things. Now I'm going to go into a quick overview on some of the tools that are more focused on landscape management, whether it's woodland behind your house, a prairie, or hunting land you own. You want to put some trails on there maybe. So we want to do all this in the healthiest way possible. So first, we're going to take a step back. Just like with Miranda's examples, you have to identify your area of interest. So I have gone and already done that with my red box here. Then we're going to click the Soil Data Explorer tab and move on to the suitabilities and limitations for use. And then we get this list of options. I find the most use to use land management and soil health. But specifically on this one, we are going to start with land management. So get right into it. We expand land management, and then we have erosion. That's going to be my first example. And so we have off-road and on-road. And if you're like me, I don't necessarily always know which one to use. So if you're not sure whether you want to use, off-road or on-road, or you even just want to, explore some of these other tools we're not diving into, you can expand it and then click View Description. And View Description will pop up this box here, and it tells you, exactly what you're looking at. It describes everything. And, even if you forget what the description means, when we're looking at the rating, we can view the description again, and it, again, will tell us exactly what we need to do. But if we're done with the description, we can click View Rating. And View Rating will bring us to this screen. It will give us the map here. And as you can see, everything is green. Everything's the same color. That means it's good, right? Well, let's dive into it. So if we break each map unit down into its rating, as you can see, there's a lot more soils than in Miranda's example, but they all still have the same rating of slight. But slight, that's a pretty vague term. What does that actually mean? If we scroll down some more, we'll get that summary table, and then we'll get that description again. So here it tells you, your choices are slight, moderate, severe, and very severe. those are the 4 ratings. Slight indicates that erosion is unlikely under ordinary climatic conditions. So if you have a map that has multiple ratings, then the areas that have a high erosion rating are areas you're going to want to avoid in the spring, after a large rainfall event. These are areas you won't want to put a road or trail through. If you're having a timber sale, these might be only areas you have winter harvesting allowed. Or if you're putting access roads on your property, these might be areas to avoid and just take extra precautions on, only travel them during the dry season or during the frozen season. So these are high risk areas, and knowing where your high risk areas are will be helpful, when you're making decisions and how to maintain that healthy landscape. So moving on, let's talk about the wind throw hazard. So wind throw hazard is talking about how likely trees are to blow down in a given area. And you might be thinking, why do I care how, if a tree blows down in the woods? Because, everyone knows if a tree falls down in the woods, no one's there to hear it. It doesn't actually make a sound. Well, you might change your mind when that tree blows down across a fence or an access road or your driveway. But once again, we're going to start with wind throw hazard. We're going to click view rating, and then we're going to get our screen. So again, I chose a random area in Sherburne County. Chose a slightly different area so we can see more than, just slight, So we have some areas that are green, yellow, and red. Again, kind of self-explanatory. Green is good, red is bad, but let's dive into it. Let's look at the results. So we'll scroll down and we will get our breakdown. Like before, each soil type or map unit has a rating which correlates to the color on the map. And on a slide before, so here we can see that, we have areas that have slight ratings and we have areas that have moderate and severe. And then, we can view the description again. We can see how much acreage we have in each one of those ratings. And we can find areas that we're going to want to avoid, find areas that we're going to want to focus on. And the slight caveat to all of this is that when we're talking about blowdown, or we're talking about areas that are a good spot to put a fence or a road or whatnot, with Web Soil Survey, we are only taking the soil into consideration. So for blowdown, for example, if you have weak trees, Web Soil Survey, they don't know that. They're only looking at the soils, where they're positioned and whatnot, and that's what they're using to determine blowdown or not. So it's not to say that blowdown can't happen outside of these areas or it's guaranteed to happen within these areas, just based on the information it's using to make it's giving you the best decisions based on soils and nothing else. So when you're looking at Web Soil Survey, always keep that in mind. There's a lot of other tools you can use, and we're a great resource. Miranda is really great for everything agricultural related, and I have a very firm understanding of everything more soil or everything more forest or landscape related. So feel free to reach out with any questions. And with that, now is a great time to ask some questions, and we can help you out in any way. Or if you have questions about other tool packs, once you've gotten into it, feel free to reach out to us and we can help you.